What if I told you the richest black community in the world is not in America? It's not in London. It's not in Lagos. It's not even in Dubai. It's in Russia. Yes, Russia. The one country where you would never expect black people to build wealth. But they did, and nobody is talking about it. Most of them came here decades ago with nothing but a visa and a dream. No money, no connections, no backup plan. And what they built inside this country quietly, without anyone noticing, is something the world completely overlooked. Today we are counting down the 10 richest black communities in Russia. Each stop on this list gets more surprising. Each story gets harder to believe. And the number one spot that one will completely change how you see everything. I can't reveal too much right now, but trust me, what's coming will stay with you. So let's get into it. We start this countdown at number 10, and already nothing is what you'd expect. This place is called African Village, and it sits in the Tver region of Russia. No skyscrapers, no nightlife, no glass towers, no luxury cars, just land and lots of it. Families here own hectares of farmland bought at 100,000 to 150,000 rubles per hectare. And that land grows wheat, vegetables, and raises livestock with profit margins between 30 to 40%. But here's what makes this place special. Most of these families didn't come from wealth. They came through post-Soviet chaos, a time when institutions collapsed, when rules stopped working, when survival depended on your community, not the government. And instead of running to the city, these families chose the soil. Someone here once said, if the system shifts, the land stays. That's not a business plan. That's a philosophy built from years of uncertainty. And the numbers back it up. Government subsidies cover up to 20% of operational costs. Schools and clinics were built to keep the population stable. With 30 to 40% margins, this is not survival farming. This is a cash-flowing asset base that most urban renters cannot compete with. When Moscow rents spike, these families feel nothing. They own the ground beneath their feet. Now think about this for a second. Imagine choosing a life where your wealth is completely invisible to the world. No designer brands, no luxury lifestyle, no showing off, but you own the land. You grow your own food. You owe nothing to anyone. When the economy crashes, you eat from your own soil. When rent doubles in the city, you don't even notice. That is African village wealth that doesn't perform, but never disappears. And here's something that makes this community quietly radical. The collectivism here is completely voluntary, not forced like the Soviet system. Families share tools, they share labor, they share childcare and decisions, but ownership stays personal. It's the Soviet model stripped of its control and rebuilt with consent. And that small difference between forced sharing and chosen sharing changes everything. But there's a trade-off hiding underneath all of this. African Village thrives because it stays invisible. No headlines, no attention, no scrutiny. But invisibility also means no influence, no voice in the systems shaping Russia's future. These families traded power for peace. Whether that trade is wise depends on what you believe wealth is truly for. And here's a fun fact that puts it all in perspective. Land in the Tver region costs less per hectare than 1 month's rent in central Moscow. Families here own what some Muscovites could never afford. Not apartments, but acres. In Russia's wealth game, African Village is playing a completely different sport. Number 10 showed us wealth built from soil and silence. But the next stop on this list, it throws all of that out the window. Because the currency there is not land. It's something you can't even touch. And what people built with it will hit you in ways you don't expect. Number 9 takes us to St. Petersburg, and this one feels completely different. This is the Petrogradsky district, where property prices sit around 550,000 rubles per square meter. Monthly incomes average about 160,000 rubles, often boosted by freelance work, teaching, and performing. But the real story here started decades ago. Soviet-era exchange programs brought African students to this city, and many of them never left. They married, they raised families, they quietly stitched themselves into the fabric of this place. And what they created here is something money can't fully explain. Petrogradsky doesn't hustle you. It doesn't sell you aspiration. It simply lets you exist. And for many black residents, that is the real luxury. Income here doesn't follow a straight line. Someone teaches during the week, performs on weekends, consults for 3 months, then disappears into a creative phase and nobody judges them for it. That rhythm keeps pressure low and mental bandwidth intact. But here's where it gets interesting. Black identity in this district is not one single thing. Mixed heritage residents talk openly about growing into blackness, not inheriting it fully formed. Faith fills the gaps. Churches and spiritual communities become anchors, especially for those balancing African roots with a Russian upbringing. Now imagine a neighborhood where nobody asks you to prove your worth, where artists are respected, creators are left alone, where your value is not measured by your salary but by the quality of your presence. That is Petrogradsky, where wealth means nobody is taking from you. Not emotionally, not creatively, not spiritually. And art here works like a quiet shield. Even when curiosity from outsiders crosses into staring, the social rules hold. Creators are protected by an unspoken code of respect. In a country where black visibility can get complicated, this district offers something rare: permission to be seen without being consumed. But not everything here is perfect. Some residents describe a quiet longing for deeper connection, more sisterhood, more shared space, more recognition beyond the stage. The community exists, but sometimes it feels like separate islands instead of one connected continent. And here's a fact most people don't know. Those Soviet-era exchange programs brought thousands of African students here decades ago. Their grandchildren now speak fluent Russian and attend local universities. The program ended long ago, but the roots it planted are still growing. Number 9 showed us wealth as creative freedom and emotional safety. But the next spot on this list takes that legacy and turns it into something much more solid. We're talking about families who arrived 50 years ago and simply refused to leave, and what patience built for them no financial advisor could have predicted. Number 8 stays in St. Petersburg, but this one carries a completely different weight. Welcome to the Vasilistrovsky district, where property prices average 600,000 rubles per square meter. That number climbs roughly 12% every single year. Median incomes sit near 170,000 rubles monthly, about 20% above the city average. But the real value here is not in the numbers, it's in time. Many black families trace their roots back to the 1970s and 80s. Soviet universities recruited African students and some never left. Degrees turned into careers, careers turned into marriages, marriages turned into families. And those families just stayed, generation after generation, until being African here stopped feeling foreign and started feeling historical. But here's what most people overlook: women played the most critical role in building this permanence. Black women became cultural translators in schools, institutions, and families. They taught this city how to see them long before the world caught up. That's a form of wealth no property price can capture. Now imagine staying in one neighborhood for 50 years. Not because you're stuck, but because you understand that reputation, education, and trust compound over time. Your children know the teachers. Your neighbors trust your name. That is Vasilistrovsky wealth, built not by chasing, but by staying. But there's tension underneath. As property climbs 12% yearly, the families who built this community might get priced out of it. Patience created this wealth, but the market now tests that same patience. And here's one detail that says it all. Some families have lived in the same apartments for 3 generations, in a city where most people move every 7 years. That's not just unusual, it's quiet defiance. Number 8, proved patience is the most underrated wealth strategy. But now the list shifts completely. The next spot is about families who didn't just buy homes, they bought ahead of the curve. And what happened next turned their timing into a masterclass. Number 7 brings us to Moscow for the first time, and the game changes immediately. This is Zayulabino in southeast Moscow, where a single metro extension changed everything. Property prices jumped into the 380,000 to 420,000 rubles per square meter range. And families who bought just ahead of that curve, their timing wasn't luck, it was planned. Household incomes here land between 145,000 and 165,000 rubles monthly. That doesn't sound massive until you understand the structure. Average household size is 4.2 people, and that changes all the math. Costs are shared, savings pool faster, one income covers housing, another funds business, a third supports education. Capital doesn't just grow here, it stacks, quietly, generation by generation. And the business numbers prove it. Roughly 15 to 20% of households run small enterprises, imports, food services, logistics, faith-adjacent commerce. Not high-margin startups, but durable ones that survive Russia's unpredictable economy. But here's what truly holds this neighborhood together. Food and faith running through everything like invisible wiring. Local markets move jollof rice, fufu, and spices not as novelties but as daily staples. Churches and mosques double as social infrastructure where real information moves. Who's hiring? Whose child needs tutoring? Which landlord is fair? The real economy of Zulabino runs through kitchens and prayer halls. And the spiritual differences here, they don't break the community. They become humor. Stories get retold. Boundaries soften. Music fills the gaps. For younger residents, releasing tracks isn't about fame. It's about proof that you belong here. Every song names their streets, their mosques, their markets. In a country where belonging is never guaranteed, a song that says, "I am from here," hits deeper than any property deed. Number 7 showed us wealth built through timing, family, and faith. But the next stop takes us just outside Moscow to a place where calm is the strategy. And a surprising legal advantage gives black families something most Russian citizens actually envy. Number 6 takes us just outside Moscow to a place that doesn't look wealthy at first. This is Lyubertsy, where housing sits at roughly 350,000 rubles per square meter. That's accessible by Moscow standards, and that accessibility is the whole point. Median incomes range between 140,000 and 160,000 rubles monthly. But most residents here don't treat their salary as the ceiling, they treat it as the floor. Trade, import-export, retail. Startup participation runs around 15%, and that's where the real money starts moving. But before we talk numbers, let's talk about something harder to measure. Lyubertsy feels calm, and that calm is not an accident. It's purchased. Lower entry costs mean families arrive without debt pressure. And when your rent doesn't terrify you, your ambition has room to breathe. That psychological freedom changes how people think about risk and business entirely. Now here's the geography advantage that makes it all work. A 20-minute electric train connects Lyubertsy to central Moscow. Families sell to the city without living in the city. Phone accessories, beauty products, clothing, packaged foods, small margins, but high turnover. Their costs stay low, their revenue stays high. And that gap between cost and income, that's exactly where wealth grows. But here's the advantage nobody talks about. Non-citizenship, something most people see as a disadvantage, actually becomes strategic here. It exempts certain residents from mandatory Russian military service. That creates family stability for those building long-term businesses. A legal status most people call limiting actually becomes liberating. And there's one more thing that works differently here. Fame bends boundaries in Lyubertsy. Musicians and creatives with local visibility report easier interactions with authorities. Recognition acts as social lubrication, smoothing encounters that might otherwise get tense. Being known here is not vanity, it's a survival tool. But here's the deeper truth. People describe Russia as strangely peaceful once you learn the system. That sounds comforting, but it carries weight. Peace in Russia is conditional. It requires learning unwritten rules. Knowing when to be visible, knowing when to disappear. Lyubertsy families have mastered that code. But mastering a system is not the same as being free within it. Number 6 showed us the suburb as a wealth buffer, calm, calculated, and quietly profitable. But the next stop, it accelerates everything. We're entering a district where cash-based economies generate millions. And the people running it all, they're not asking anyone for permission. Number 5, and this is where the energy shifts completely. Welcome to Kuzminki, where property averages 400,000 rubles per square meter. Household incomes range from 150,000 to 170,000 rubles monthly. But that number doesn't tell the real story. A huge portion of earnings here is cash-based. Afro retail, food, hair, logistics, informal services. These businesses account for roughly 20% of all local commercial activity, and most of it never touches a bank. But to understand why this place runs the way it does, you need to understand when these families arrived. Most came during the chaotic 1990s when Russia's economy completely collapsed. Risk tolerance had to be sky high just to survive. That history shaped everything about how this community works. Fear doesn't freeze action in Kuzminki, it informs it. Every business opened, every deal made, every market stall maintained. All of it carries the memory of a decade when nothing was guaranteed. And here's the number that proves how strong this community really is. Remittance networks here move over $5 million abroad every single year. And the local economy doesn't even flinch. When a neighborhood can export $5 million and still grow, it's not just a community anymore. It's an economy. Now picture this. Deals happen on park benches. Grandparents watch children while parents run shops. Teenagers help after school, not for allowance, but because the family business is the family. That is Kuzminki multi-generational efficiency turned into multi-generational wealth. But here's the part that hits hardest. The people running all of this, they're not men in suits. Matriarchs anchor this entire economy. They control property. They manage finances. They stabilize families across generations. Without them, businesses stall. Remittances stop. The community loses its center. In Kuzminki, the richest person on the block is often a grandmother. But there's a ceiling hiding beneath all this success. Cash economies are powerful, but cash is invisible to banks and credit systems. Families with real wealth look modest on paper. Getting a mortgage or a business loan requires documented income, and documentation is exactly what cash economies avoid. Kuzminki's greatest strength is also its biggest limitation. Number 5 showed us informal wealth hardening into real power. But the next stop builds wealth through something completely different, something quieter and more permanent. We're heading to a district in the shadow of one of Russia's most elite universities. And the pipeline it created from student to owner is unlike anything else on this list. Number 4, and now we enter a completely different kind of wealth. This is Ramenki in southwest Moscow. Property prices sit between 500,000 and 600,000 rubles per square meter. Median income hovers around 180,000 rubles monthly. But that number hides something important: trajectory. Graduates here experience steep income jumps within 5 to 10 years, especially in law, international relations, engineering, and IT. And it all starts with one thing: the university. About 10% of students at nearby MGIMO and research institutes have African ties. That creates a quiet but incredibly powerful pipeline. Education leads to residency. Residency leads to employment. Employment leads to ownership. Same streets, same transit routes, same networks. Students rent modestly, then buy locally once income stabilizes. It's wealth built through continuity, not disruption. And here's what makes Ramenki truly different. Study groups turn into friendships. Classmates become colleagues. Colleagues become co-owners. The university here is not a stepping stone. It's the foundation beneath everything. Every business, every property, every family that stayed. Now imagine attending university in a foreign country, then staying in that same neighborhood for 20 years. You know every street. You know the landlords. You know who to trust. That knowledge built over decades is worth more than any degree. Ramenki families don't just have diplomas, they have maps of the entire system. And something else happens here that's hard to explain. Identity sharpens. Being African in Russia stops feeling theoretical. There are no official clubs, no organizations, no announcements. Just people who studied together, stayed together, and built together. The community exists because it never had to announce itself. But here's the trade-off. Education wealth takes time, 5 to 10 years before the real payoff arrives. During those years, graduates live modestly and delay gratification. In a world obsessed with instant results, Ramenki demands patience. And in a volatile country like Russia, patience itself is a gamble. Number 4 showed us education as a quiet wealth engine. But the next stop operates on a level most people can't even imagine. We're moving closer to the center of Russian power, where wealth doesn't prove itself anymore. It just exists. Number 3, and now we're stepping into a world that feels almost unreal. This is Zamoskvoreki, sitting just south of the Kremlin itself, bordered by the river, protected by heritage zoning. Property prices here range from 700,000 to 800,000 rubles per square meter. And they climb 15% every single year, driven purely by scarcity. Median income sits near 200,000 rubles monthly, boosted by foreign stipends and diplomatic allowances. But the money is not what makes this place different. The roughly 600 black residents here are tied to embassies, cultural institutions, and international organizations. This is legacy wealth, slow, steady, and deeply rooted. Homes here are larger than the Moscow average. 4 and 5 room apartments are common. And spending patterns look nothing like the rest of this list. Museum memberships, language programs, private tutors, international travel. Crime rates sit at just 0.5 incidents per 1,000 residents. Security here isn't loud, it's embedded into everything. And that safety creates something money alone can never buy. Now imagine raising your children in a neighborhood where they never feel fear walking to school, where their biggest worry is which museum to visit on Saturday, where blackness is not a battle, but a conversation. That is Zamość Dworzeckie. And the psychological effect of that safety on children, it compounds across generations. No financial report can measure that. Because here's the real lesson of this district: safety changes the way childhood unfolds. When fear is removed from daily life, ambition has room to breathe. Children here don't dream defensively planning escape routes from racism or poverty. They dream expansively because nobody told them they couldn't. That psychological freedom is the most expensive asset on this entire list. But there's a tension underneath this comfort. Safety can become a bubble. Children raised without friction may struggle when they meet it outside this district. The same protection that nurtures ambition can also create fragility. Wealth built inside a bubble only lasts if that bubble holds. And no bubble holds forever. Here's one more detail that explains everything. Heritage zoning means new construction here is almost impossible. You cannot build more Zamość Dworzeckie. You can only buy what already exists. Families who bought decades ago now sit on assets that grow faster than most stock portfolios, simply because they chose to stay. Number 3 showed us wealth that doesn't perform, it just settles. But the next stop shatters that calm completely. We're heading into glass towers where everything moves faster and burns hotter. And the people thriving there, they didn't choose safety, they chose fire. Number 2, and everything you've seen so far gets turned upside down. This is Presnensky District, home to Moscow City's glass towers. Property here pushes 900,000 to 1 million rubles per square meter. But almost nobody buys the traditional way. Corporate housing allowances, company-leased apartments, units bought through business entities. Income ranges are wide from 220,000 to 400,000 plus rubles monthly, and that number changes based on how the month goes. Among the roughly 800 black residents here, most are self-employed or brand-driven. They deliberately avoid salaried jobs because ceiling matters more than safety. These are not people climbing corporate ladders. They built their own ladders, and every rung is a risk. Now here's what makes this place unlike anything else on the list. Fame works as a social buffer in Presnensky. Recognition changes how people treat you. Police encounters soften. Bureaucracy bends. A known face moves through Moscow completely differently than an unknown one. Tattoos, aesthetics, loyalty signaling, none of it is rebellion. It's legibility, a way of being read correctly in a rigid system. But that visibility cuts both ways. Businesses here grow fast, but scrutiny follows scale. The higher you rise in Moscow City, the more eyes are watching. And in Russia, attention from the wrong eyes can end everything overnight. Success here isn't just about making money, it's about managing attention. And here's the trade-off baked into everything. Presnensky wealth burns bright, but volatility is built into its core. Crypto crashes, brand deals expire, attention fades. The entrepreneurs here ride waves that can disappear without warning. Speed versus permanence, that's the eternal battle of this district. Number 2 showed us wealth at its most volatile, high risk, high reward, high visibility. But the number 1 spot, the richest black community in all of Russia, is the complete opposite. It doesn't test. It doesn't perform. It doesn't announce itself. It just exists quietly, close enough to power to benefit from it. And when you see how wealth operates there, you'll understand why real money never makes noise. Number 1, the richest black community in all of Russia. This is Khamovniki District in the heart of central Moscow. Property here sits at 850,000 to 950,000 rubles per square meter, Russia's top 1 to 2%. Median income reaches 250,000 rubles monthly. Dual income households often clear 300,000 to 350,000. And here's what separates this spot from every other on the list. These families are owners, not renters. 60% home ownership in a city where most people can barely afford rent. Most bought during the late Soviet era when prices were low and uncertainty was high. That timing created a compounding advantage that decades of appreciation have magnified. Mortgages paid off, debt minimal, no speculation, no urgency, no noise. Just quiet preservation, low leverage, diversified holdings, and slow, steady growth. Education absorbs the spending. Here families pay 1 to 2 million rubles yearly for international schooling. Private clinics, embassies, and international schools sit within walking distance. When everything around you just works, you stop worrying. And when you stop worrying, your wealth starts compounding on its own. But here's the deepest layer of kamovniki. These families carry dual fluency African roots paired with deep Moscow literacy. Parents pass down discipline forged during instability, not bravado. Their children grow up navigating a quiet tension. 10 communities, 10 levels of wealth, from farmland in Tver to glass towers in Moscow City, to the untouchable quiet of kamovniki. But the real truth connecting every single community on this list has not been said yet. And it changes how you see black wealth not just in Russia but everywhere. Here is the truth hiding beneath every community on this list. Black wealth in Russia was never supposed to exist. But from farmland to the Kremlin's shadow, they built it anyway. Black wealth does not need permission. It needs land, time, and the stubborn refusal to leave. These families stayed until their presence became permanent. The quiet empires are still growing. Now you know where to find them. Subscribe so you never miss the next story. And drop a comment which community shocked you most.